for the Nutrimedical Report, and we have Van Morrison, our scientist here. Professor McCANNEY will be at the bottom of the hour, and of course we'll also have him over in hour number 4. Let's go over all the major updates you have, and you have a lot. Again, unfortunately, there's no news but bad news. We try to give people some good news to, the positive spin and solutions to the problems, but there is no shortage of bad news. What's happening?
Well, I think that I want to start out with the FOIA request that USA Today had made after Dr. Bruce Ivans had been accused of the Amerithrax letters in 2001 and then subsequently died by overdose in 2009.
Right.
But in 2007, USA Today had found some emails that Dr. Ivans had warned his military colleagues that the new irradiator at Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah was defective. So that was in 2007. And this email is the smoking gun for the subsequent persecution of Dr. Ivans by the military. The defective irradiator has been used until the military just shut down the distribution of anthrax solutions last week.
Wow.
So from 2007 to 2015, they've been sending out live anthrax.
Wow.
And they were not supposed to do that because although they are a BSL-3 laboratory, they were sending the irradiated anthrax in an aqueous solution to BSL-2 laboratories. Well, the BSL-2 laboratories did their receiving inspection, and they grew what they were sent in sheep blood agar to check that the anthrax was inactivated. Unfortunately, several of the laboratories grew live anthrax, which is airborne. And BSL-2 laboratories are not designed to handle airborne anthrax.
Wow.
So this is a smoking gun for what happened to Dr. Bruce Ivans.
Wow. Now, of course, this fits in perfectly. This tells you the operation of the military is they're incompetent. They literally, if you want to call slaughter their own, if they cross them. They have an attitude of, we're going to cover this up and we're going to persecute. And, of course, you wonder, and again wonder very highly, that this man was probably not suicide, but suicided. In other words, just like what I call Vince Foster, I call the term that I've used for years now is called fostercide, where he did something that was basically historically impossible, and even if he was a member of the Cirque du Soleil, he couldn't have done the gymnastics necessary to commit that kind of suicide. So I call it fostercide. How's that?
Well, that's certainly pertinent in today's world. This reminds me of Chernobyl. What happened in Chernobyl was that they were told by the political jockeys in Moscow to restart the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, even though they had shut it down. And unfortunately, the people at the reactor, they pulled out the control rods, and they expected to see the water heating up, and it didn't heat up. And so they pulled them out more, and they still had no heating. And they finally pulled them all the way out because they kept getting these calls from Moscow that said, we want this thing online, and it's not online. We're not getting power. And they pulled them all the way out. Well, about that time, the xenon, which is a neutron poison, disintegrated, and all of a sudden they had a nuclear accident there, which you would call it China syndrome.
Yeah, they had what's called xenon poisoning of the reactor core, so it went critical is what happened.
So it went critical, and this is the same thing that they did at Dugway, is that they would run the samples through an irradiator, and they said that they weren't inactivating the anthrax, so they kept adding additional megarads of radiation.
Right.
And in the past, 4 megarads would do the job. This is what Dr. Ivan says, this is 2 million rads over that, and there's still no sterility. So then they went to a total of 6 million rads. And so they just kept adding, they just kept upping the radiation that the anthrax was exposed to, and it wasn't getting sterile. So he warned them in 2007, and unfortunately, now it didn't have to be a piece of equipment. It could have been that when they replaced the irradiator, I guess would be a better term for it, that the standard operating procedure, the step-by-step that they go through when they're inactivating a batch of anthrax, that could have been made for the previous irradiator and not for the current one. So in any case, it could have been a planning error, it could have been an engineering error, it could have been a worker error, but certainly there was something wrong in 2007, and he notified the military at that time.
It could be the frequency or the spectra of radiation. For example, when you're having a radiator, you're going to be generating both beta particle emissions and gamma, and if you don't have the right frequency spectra, you may not be able to kill anthrax. Anthrax, in order to kill it in a sterilizing environment, requires 5 atmospheres of pressure at over 300 degrees for many hours, and over 1,200 degrees for 2 to 3 hours. So it's not easy to kill anthrax spores in the best of times. So if they didn't do what's called a kill ratio curve pattern, looking at the spectra of radiation, they should have redone it for the new irradiator, but they didn't. They probably just transferred the old irradiator information, and then it would literally, probably the spectrum of radiation being generated was not the same as the old irradiator, so it didn't work. That would be my guess.
Well, I'll accept your guess as good as anybody else's.
It's just a guess, but it means that they should have retested to make sure the kill curve was there. And of course
they didn't do it, and so they've been sending out hot batches ever since then.
That's pretty nasty.
They have now stopped sending out batches of anthrax.
Now, the next story is on Ebola at the National Institute of Health. What's going on there in Bethesda, Maryland?
Well, one person is still being treated for Ebola there, and that person has been at the NIH, the National Institute of Health, for about a month, and we don't get any updates. Patient
other probably individuals.
confidentiality.
There's almost certainly other individuals that they're not notifying us of, because we know that Obama's had the policy of actually flying people that are even not American citizens, foreign nationals, to American BSL facilities or hospitals that don't have BSL-4 facility containment rooms, and in experimenting on them to see what happens, whether or not it's giving sera from previous people that are infected, or these different types of recombinant therapy, like the tobacco recombinant therapy that they were giving, that was creating an antibody to block the Ebola virus from spreading.
Well, medical personnel are well known for being for agreeing to those kinds of experiments. They are very altruistic. Anyway, the John Hopkins Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, has now added a new biocontainment laboratory. It's got 3 rooms that are isolated for infectious disease. So that brings, along with, so I'm going to say who they are, the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska, and Rocky Mountain Laboratories, and NIH facility in Hamilton, Montana, each have 2. So 2 times 4 is 8, plus 3 is 11.
That's not very many beds or rooms for a proper BSL-4 levels certification for a dangerous pathogen like Ebola, is it?
Well, I have more on this.
Yeah, I bet. Come back in a minute. We'll hear more about some more information dealing with the last topic we're on.
Yeah, that has to do with the biocontainment units. Right. And I had said that so they've added one in New York. So they have rooms for 11 people that are that have infectious diseases such as Ebola or Lassa fever or MERS, and then they funded 9 facilities to add 2 more rooms each. So it'll be 2 times 9 is 18 plus 11. So there's going to be 29 rooms, and of course we have a population of 320 million people. Somehow 29 rooms just doesn't seem like enough to me. I would like to see them at every port of entry into the United States, at every international airport. I would like to see them test people for at least these 3, and probably also H5N1.
You know those screening, those screening machines that they developed, which will tell you within half hour to 45 minutes if you have any pathogen. They just had the proper kits for when they went over there. In fact, our team went over there with their military. You mentioned on the break one military officer died that was deployed over there, found dead outside his, I think it's in Texas, was it, where he was his housing when he came back.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, they never gave any specifics. I mean, they put out a press release that said it wasn't Ebola, but I just don't know how much you can believe what the military tells you.
How about none of it until they prove with proof? In other words, I like the comment before Ronald Reagan had too many aspartame-laced jelly beans that Rumsfeld gave him, that trust but verify, which means you have to verify everything, whether it's... I tell people verify not only in the physical with scientific evidence, but with peripheral evidence. So we have a situation now where basically the government's playing around with fire. They don't have up to the bars, BSL 3 or 4 facilities. They don't have a number of beds to deal with serious plagues that come into the country. They've been playing around the last year or so, actually, with bringing people that are non-U.S. citizens to hospital systems in America that have Ebola. But we not only have that, we have MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus, that could literally explode here. We also have XMDR TB. We have other pathogens. I think that we are really just sitting duck for a major plague. And none of the processes or procedures they have, like, temperature monitoring in airports, they should have all these gene bioengines, and also they can use scalar technologies such as the Metatron. They could screen at every airport and tell them if they have the scalar frequencies of a pathogen. So what I think they should do is 3 things. Number 1, every aircraft should have a chain of custody with a HEPA filter that goes off to a CDC-certified lab for virus, TB, etc. They should have a gene bioengine, and they should have a Metatron at every airport to determine if you're there. Temperature monitoring is useless. The Metatron and the gene bioengine to actually determine the gene sequence, if it's present, will tell you in minutes, and they should not, and anybody from specific target countries come in unless they've been screened by the Metatron and gene bioengine to make sure with these test kits that they have to have for a specific pathogen like Ebola or MERS or whatever, because they're going to come in a flying culture tube from a foreign country. And when they get here, if they embed in the animal population, we're going to have endemic virus like Ebola that's going to get into our pet populations or our wild bird population. Then we're really going to have problems.
We need to be taking these things very seriously, and I don't see that at any level of the government. No,
and I'm giving specific answers as to what they need to do, but they're not going to do it. When I met in March of 2001, because I was the appointment under Reserve Admiral John Hughes for Operation Top Off in Dark Winter, and I met the CDC and the FBI Director for Bioterrorism with the head of infectious disease at the University of Colorado, and I asked specific questions for the CDC and the FBI Director for National Bioterrorism, and they gave me no answers that made any sense whatsoever. I didn't know whether they were just plain evil or stupid. And it was disturbing. It was really disturbing. It's like, oh my God. No HEPA filters in all aircraft, no point of contact evaluations. And when we did our war game simulation on 17th Avenue with release of weaponized anthrax as a simulation in downtown Denver, our simulation, we killed everybody. We killed everyone. We did a war game simulation on a supercomputer for, we bought NOAA time on their NOAA supercomputer for the National Aeronautics Administration up in Boulder, Colorado, and our war game simulation of smallpox, weaponized smallpox coming in from Cairo to Oklahoma City. We had it spread in 90 days to 93 countries and killed 93 million American people. So the government is woefully and superiorly incompetent to a level that's what I call galactically incredible. And there's making no moves whatsoever to improve anything, to block the virus, to properly monitor coming in, and to identify cases early so they don't die or spread it further to other health professionals or people they're in contact with. Nothing that I suggested to them in 97 under Reserve Admiral Hughes was done by 2001. And they told me they were going to do a war game simulation, by the way, on anthrax up in the northeast United States. 6 months later, they said in the fall in the northeast United States, and I specifically asked questions about each city because they did plausibly deniable answers, and the city was New York. So they're going to do in the New York, New Jersey area war game simulations with that and with micronukes, etc. So when 9/11 happened, I knew the government did it. It was a war game simulation that went live.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about MERS. We have possibly 3 cases of MERS in China, and we have a German who traveled to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. He returned. He was treated from February until June of this year for MERS, and then he had been moved out of isolation in May after his treatment seemed effective. But then he died in June of complications from MERS. So I'm not sure what happened there. But
well, MERS is a relapsing disease anyway. We know that. There are cases that have happened where they're in not a stable state, but a semi-stable state, and then all of a sudden they deteriorate very rapidly.
That's what happened. But don't you think the doctor should have known that?
Well, I think that they don't understand the pathology of how this disease occurs. MERS is a very strange disease, and we saw this in Ontario, Canada, when it happened. We'd see people that would be in a really not good state, and then all of a sudden they'd have a cytokine storm, and they'd just die suddenly. And they could basically get a massive cytokine storm, and it would just kill them. So my guess is similar things happen where the immune system finally wakes up, and you get a massive release of cytokines, and they just die. They go into cardiorespiratory arrest and disseminated intravascular coagulopathy, and they have, start seizing and bleeding from every orifice, and it's nasty.
Well, okay. As a result of what's going on of the course of MERS in South Korea, they are starting to think that maybe MERS coronavirus is airborne because they're up to the 5th generation in the cases.
Now, so in other words, either that or it's changed in its means of transport, or it's evolved, is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, they keep saying it hasn't evolved.
I wonder why they're doing that when it seems to be completely different than the other. Continue our science. The H5N2 is pretty nasty, and it's growing from barn to barn. You mentioned in the last when we were on break. Can you give some more details of what's happening there?
Well, they've had a hard time containing the H5N2, and they knew that it was, could be attached to the dust or the feathers of the poultry.
Which farm was that?
They didn't. Excuse me.
Where's it located?
It's in on the page. It's on page 4.
Which location in the country is it in? This
is in Iowa. They've had to kill so many flocks in Iowa that the price of eggs has tripled.
Right,
and
exactly.
In Minnesota, and now it's in Nebraska. So they've been looking into the biosecurity, and what they did initially was they implemented biosecurity at the gate of the farm factory, of the poultry factory. So people would have to dress in their PPE when they entered the farm. But that didn't stop the spread. So now they've discovered that the wind will move the bird flu virus from barn to barn, and so you could consider it as airborne. And when it's airborne, that means that it can affect people. And where the barns are close to the property lines, it can move it from farm to farm. So industrial farming will now have to provide biosecurity.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, please continue, Ann, and we're going to be joined by Professor McCANNEY. We got his power problems connected. This situation basically is like an end-time plague. I mean, you could go back to read the Bible and read, the first plagues, which is the rivers turn red, which you want to be like Chernobyl. The red from the radiation toxicology effects of Fukushima Daiichi, which, by the way, is just a foreknowledge of what will happen around the world if the power goes out. as I talked earlier today to Professor McCANNEY, the power is in some ways more devastating than even a nuclear war or a plague, because if the power goes out, society cannot revert back to a kind of pre-agrarian day where there's no power. Most of the population are not able to, like even back in the 1930s, 78% to 90% of the population could get at or near a farm. It's less than 5% of the population now. And I think that a total collapse now would not go back to the Stone Age. It would make the Stone Age look like the Sandals Resort. If you want to look at an analogy, it would be like, it would make Road Warrior, and again, the latest one called Fury Road, that would be like a garden party compared to what's really going to happen if the power goes out. And I'm just going to draw some analogies here so you'll realize why Professor McCANNEY's wing generator and his issues dealing with decrypting, because the two major, if you want to call it, weak points of the New World Order are two things: encryption of technology to exchange electronic money, which is like Bitcoin only, and number two, the provision of energy, so it's distributed network like he talks about. And in fact, if you can do that, you can then institute things like using our Nutridyne and other, pods of civilization that can protect themselves from spread of plagues. Our government not only are not wanting to fix the problem, they're actually amplifying it. Their policies are actually making this worse. For example, the spread from Dugway Proving Grounds of the weaponized anthrax, the lack of policies at the airports since the last 30 years to reinstitute HEPA filters, and as I recommended that every single aircraft should have a chain of custody with every aircraft taking a filter and sending it off to a CDC certified lab for virology testing and DNA analysis like these DNA bioengines. None of these things are being done, and it's on purpose. Basically, if I'm providing as one doctor solutions to every one of these issues and not one of my solutions is being instituted, imagine the thousands of other health professionals that could give solutions. They're not listening to any of them, including this doctor that they persecuted and later they, quote, suicided. So, we're going to hear from Professor McCANNEY in just a minute, but any other major stories you want to talk about today?
Well, I do. I want to talk about the drought along the West Coast, but go ahead with Professor McCANNEY. I'll put it in later.
Yeah, Professor McCANNEY, we're going to talk, of course, in the next hour or two on your wing generator program, and we're also going to have for a little while on the Mountain Red Velvet people. But I want you to talk about these issues of the plagues, because I think the space weather and the radiation levels have a lot to do with the speeded viral, we call a genetic drift, if you want to call it. Gene drift is amplified by radiation. In fact, that's why solar cycles and sun cycles are directly tied to the emergence of super plagues and the passage of comets. That's why comets are foreboding of major damage to the biosphere and the release of super plagues. And of course, historically, people are not stupid. They've seen these over millennia, that the passage of comets and the changes of space weather had a major effect on release of plagues around the Earth, haven't they?
Well, yeah, if you go back to the Middle Ages, the 1300s, actually before that, the Chinese had already recorded an increase in the flu, the swine flu that basically birds give it to the pigs give it to people, right. Type flus, a spike increase, not just an increase, but a spiked increase during the inferior conjunction of Venus. And what my work has shown is that the virus is actually developed in the comet tail. And Venus was a comet. It's still acting as a comet. It has a very faint comet tail. And we literally pass through this, and this comes down in the rain. And, along with the dust, it's carried with the dust. And so literally there's a worldwide influenza jump. And I've made many predictions on the rise of influenza based on the inferior conjunction of Venus. And so, these things are real. I mean, these are also documented in the medical journals. So this is not just the Chinese folk medicine. This is documented in the medical.
But you connected
journals.
it to the plasma physics and space weather and cometary tails, and the fact that these pathogens are present in the cometary tail, and that there is some degree of, quote, panspermia, that there are viruses and bacteria, etc., that are in space because it didn't just originate on Earth.
Yeah, no, they just announced a couple of days ago at the Paris Air Show, the Rosetta mission scientists had a meeting where they released the latest data. They've recovered the Philae lander, and what did they discover? There's not a drop of water on the comet nucleus. When they look at a distance, they're just seeing individual atomic species, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen primarily, which are the building blocks of virus. I mean, we're looking, and they found that the surface of the nucleus, now they have landed on there. We've seen 6 comet nuclei from a distance, but they are looking at the powder, which literally covers the nucleus in craters that have been burned out by the electron beam. But they're looking at this powder and they're going, first of all, there's no water. There's lots of hydrogen, there's lots of oxygen, but it is not in the form of water. Right. And secondly, what they're seeing is organic structures. Can you imagine the amount of viruses that are on the surface of that comet nucleus? Now, this is just absolutely incredible, and the Earth is doing this all the time. So when you get solar storms or other, like right now, we just went through a phase where we had a cross-solar system electrical exchange between Mercury and Saturn. That was the cause of all that weather around the end of May. And the end result is that, this is building up, along with the weather that we're seeing, this is building up viruses in the environment of Earth, and this is coming in. We're seeing this.
Right.
But you're talking about genetic change, too. If you look at the statistical ability in this mixing soup in the comet tail, the ability to generate different viruses, it's amazing. Now you couple this with the military. In Tier 1, of course, they've learned from my work. They understand this. They can take those viruses and then combine them, put them together, and feed them out to the public.
Exactly. And people need to understand that 93% of the human genome is actually created from chunks of ancient viral DNA, which is why human and all living mammals and so on have receptor binding domains for viruses, because it's the DNA bus. In other words, human beings are built from chunks of ancient viral. And we talked about the highly pathogenic H5N2. What I see happening, and these are exactly fitting with Professor McCANNEY's thesis, that viral and other pathogen plagues are signs that cometary activity and space activity is increasing. What people need to understand is it fits in exactly with the plasma physics of the electric universities talked about for years. It fits in with the generations of viruses and other material. It turns out that the human cells have receptor binding domains, and so does all living things, because 93% of the DNA of human cells, including not only the alleles, 32,000 alleles, but 93% of the overall DNA is ancient viral DNA that's actually been thrown together in chunks like a tar paper shack in Haiti. And that, in fact, your DNA, it doesn't evolve randomly. It evolves by intelligent recreation, which I call by the Most High God, adapting to the environment of the planet. But the theory of panspermia is based on reality, that that life and DNA and epigenetic and microtubules are everywhere in the universe, and in fact there is a major danger of super plagues occurring, literally from space weather bringing in these organisms, and also changing the epigenetics of major plague releases here on Earth. So MERS, resistant TB, H5N1, and of course the laboratories are tweaking them as well, because they want plagues, they want chaos. The chaos masters of the planet want these because they want massive population reduction. That's why they're desertification of the North Pacific Ocean by not fixing Fukushima. That's why they're drying out California, which is now in some parts of the state 25% drop in realtor prices. They're desertifying all the way from Alberta to Texas. And this is because they want to have major population shifts. And they call themselves environmentalists, but they really aren't. These are globalist, control freak maniacs that are completely satanically energized. And if you're writing this as a movie script, you'd have to say they're terraforming the Earth in advance of an invading species of another type of being from another part of the galaxy. That's what you'd have to say. Because this is not something that you do even as a rich or powerful person. It's something that's so evil to decimate the biosphere I call omnicide, and to wipe out much of humanity is the exact plan that people like Obama and the Pope and the United Nations and the Council on Foreign Relations are up to. It's not rational.
When you look, Dr. Bill, at the extensive work that's done on searching for exoplanets, they have literally discovered that Earth is an extremely rare entity. There are lots of water planets, but there are none that have the thousands of factors necessary for abundant life. And so it's not like we're going to find one and go visit there and go move there. We got to take care of what's here. And so literally, and I've said this before, we have to get rid of the banking system. That is the key number one thing that has to be done on this earth. And when you do it, it's like getting rid of cockroaches in the kitchen. You can't leave any of them because they'll come back and infest the whole kitchen again. So we have a big job on this planet, and people really have to understand that our survival depends on this.
I know how to replace it, and I can give you the very short thing, and it's based on things that you've taught me as well. The first step is encryption. You have to have encrypted cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, only a few steps further. You need to make sure that all currency is based on what's called bartering, and you are able to do an encrypted bartering network that could be literally on the backbone of the mark of the beast itself. And then if you have encryption, you could say so many hours of babysitting is equal to so many yards of concrete, or so much yard work, or so much work on your roof. And basically everything is a value of intellectual property, physical action, and specific things like food. And then you have an exchange system that can involve transport to and from the place of purchase to the place of usage. And then you have an encrypted currency that, based on real economy, also what happens is you don't end up with any interest, which is usury. Number two, you have a credit system where basically your capacity to generate wealth means you have wealth. So therefore you have purchasing power based on your ability to generate wealth, either intellectual property or physical property for other people. And that means immediately you can value a nation not based on whether or not it's been endured to a bank on interest, which is to me a criminal activity, which is why in ancient Israel they had literally the Jubilee year, and they had these years where there's restoration, so all debts were canceled. In fact, most people realize, every 7 years, and there was a Jubilee year every 7 times 7, which is right now coming next year after Elul 29. And the reason is that God saw that debt itself was evil, which is why, in fact, even in the early Christian church, usury or debt was considered a mortal sin which would send you to hell. And in fact, that's why the Pope literally authorized the kippah for the Jewish population, the burgermeisters, to become the bankers of Europe. So he gave them a dispensation to become all the bankers of Europe and Russia. And most people don't realize that the entire banking system of the world is under the Vatican and under the Jesuits, who used to be the Knights Templar, which are the first bankers of earth, following the ones of the ancient Babylonia. They're the latest incarnation of the Babylonian bankers, which is where contracts and banking started, is in Babylon. And
all of this was done many times, thousands of years ago. The banking system, interest, destroying an economy, coming in, putting usury in, getting phony money. This has all been done before.
Exactly. So in other words, it's right in the Bible. You can't have interest and have an economy, and you have to wipe out those debts every 7 years, or the economy is destroyed and people lose their land, their property, their connection to the land, and their historical property, which is the land. And again, the land is not owned by us, it's a covenant with God. And so the point is an economy that would be an encrypted currency based on bartering without interest would allow a real economy to occur, would allow no one to ever incur debt, and would allow, even if you had some kind of usury system, it would always wipe out the debt at the end of 7 years. So those debts would be wiped out just like in the biblical principles. And if we applied biblical principles to the system, we would have a world economy where nobody would be hungry. There would be no need for war, because war is always a result of debt. Debt always results in war. In fact, the greatest debt machine is war.
Yeah, exactly. It goes hand in hand.
Right.
The Israelite term for loan was a benefactor. The benefactor was somebody who was received, and the beneficiary was somebody who received, and the benefactor was somebody who gave. The modern term is a mortgage. That it comes from the Latin to kill. And the amortization table is something hidden behind the interest rate. And that amortize means that it's going to kill you financially. That's the whole purpose. They even say it right in the word. Most people don't even know what an amortization table is. But just in the terminology of modern banking, look at what's going on in Greece right now. The Greeks are finally getting wise. They're going to pull out, and in Germany is the biggest debtor, with the World Bank shill over there, Merkel. She looks, by the way, like Nancy Lieder. I want everybody to look at that. They look like sisters. That's a very interesting thing. And by the way, Elon Musk looks like Warren Buffett. So I'm just starting to notice some of these things.
I'm sure there's some genetic connections there, just like the black nobility of Venezia going right back, and Bill Clinton looks exactly like Nero, believe it or not.
Well, he's John D. Rockefeller's illegitimate son.
Right. Now, but by the way, we have some more news here that I wanted to pop over back to, go back and forth. Georgia Power, and you have an article here about the flex domes in Georgia Power about the pseudo-nuclear plants. I mean, why don't they have Kevlar spider-soaked tent or flex domes like this over all these power plants that are about to blow and release hydrogen or have hypercritical reactions and nuclear release into the troposphere and the oceans? Why don't they build an extra seawall and have that radioactive water then double filtered after it goes through the aquifer and filtered and turned to solid nuclear waste? I don't understand why nothing's being done, and now they don't even pull a fuel rod assembly pellets out of reactor core cooling pool 1, 2, and 3 because they don't have room in cooling pool 4 anymore, and they have no plan to remove the nuclear waste from the general site to a safe facility like the bottom of a zinc mine 7 miles down. Everything
the Columbia River at Vancouver is running dry.
Wow. Yeah, so we are months, not years, away from cataclysm.
That's right.
And the key things are dealing with the reality of how the globalists are manipulating the climate, causing drought, bringing about plagues, getting ready to crash the world economy with debt. Their plan is they're in a panic to maintain control as the cataclysm comes about and culminates in a disaster starting after Elul 29, this September 23rd. It is the Shemitah year, as I say. The Shemitah is hitting the fan.